What if I told you that there was a country where the most marginalized citizens, who never had a chance of being anything more than slaves, because they were the most unhealthy and the most uneducated in the entire society? In this country, the laws are specifically written to target these groups, and law enforcement are giving arrest quotas to fill. This country, that you may have guessed, is the United States. A lot of people would have you think that the justice system is broken. I'm going to prove to you today that the American injustice system is doing exactly what it was meant to do. Despite only having 5% of the world's population, the US is home to almost 25% of the planet's incarcerated population. Prison activist and scholar Angela Davis once said that prisons have become our first response to homelessness, poverty, mental illness, and drug addiction. Today, blacks are actually 5 times more likely to be arrested than their white counterparts. Most sociologists agree that instead of rehabilitation in the US prison system, it actually can be described as criminogenic, or it produces even more crime. The reason for abolishing prisons is not only because they don't serve their purpose, but they actually produce more crime and increase the number of inmates annually. Scholars call this the revolving door of incarceration. 2/3 of convicts become repeat offenders within 3 years after being released. Once released, felons are barred from voting, which is actually in violation of international law. And this was found by the UN's International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights in 2006. Education, jobs, and housing become scarce, and therefore proper mental and physical health care do as well. The correlation between having a convict parent and the chances of their children going to jail are positive. Instead of a catch-all band-aid to theft, drug abuse, and mental illness, many communities have formed restorative justice programs, where criminals and their victims work together for solutions and accountability. Creating health-based programs in the community would also help addicts stay out of prison, where drugs are readily available anyway. Providing healthcare, housing, childcare, and a good education are the only ways to create real long-term safety in the streets. Now, many opponents of the prison abolition movement will simply state that they're horrible people and they deserve their punishments. However, this doesn't address the growing prison population, especially when compared to the number of new schools being created. In 2010, in fact, the prison population received $39 million in tax money. New York State spends the most on its inmates, in fact. Annually, $60,000 a year is spent to maintain one inmate in New York State. 4 years, in the last 4 years, the prison industrial complex has actually increased by 500%. Is it because we're a bad country? Or is it something in the water? Some opponents might cite that the 8th and 13th Amendments protect prisoners. The truth is, the 8th Amendment, which states that there should be no excessive bail or sentencing and no cruel and unusual punishment for a prisoner, doesn't protect the prison population. In fact, there's a well-known abusive and exacerbating prison culture where judges, gangs, and even correctional officers are involved and profit from extorting prisoners. Also, a few years ago, the Kids for Cash scandal hit the newswaves. Two Pennsylvania judges, Mike Conahan and Mark Ciavarella, were caught and charged with bribery to send as many children as possible to the local juvie. They're both currently serving almost 20 years in prison each for locking people up for profit. The 13th Amendment says neither slavery nor involuntary servitude except as a punishment for a crime, whereof the party shall be duly convicted, shall exist in the United States or any place subject to its jurisdiction. So inmates, in fact, waive their rights as human beings and are subjugated to tough labor and inhumane conditions, low wages that once they work, or are desperate and take jobs with experimental drugs for money. After the Civil War, in fact, slavery wasn't abolished, but just transferred to felons. Blacks went straight from the plantations in some cases to the prisons. They were criminalized for loitering and other minor offenses. They couldn't read, and they definitely couldn't pay the bail. So they were forced into prison to work. In this, one could argue that the police back then, and arguably till now, have become glorified slave catchers. Policing in the United States is based on white supremacy and anti-black racism. This has created a faster pipeline to prison at a younger age for young black men. So what's the problem? And what can you do? The truth is, crime spreads. And because many of these marginalized groups are fighting for limited resources, these crimes are committed by desperate people, not evil people. That's just dismissive and lazy. Hurt people hurt people. And if the rich continue to hoard resources, crime will only intensify. It starts with a simple change of one's mindset. Instead of harboring law and order reactionary attitudes, it's time for real solutions. Thank you.